The Stage Door Show, celebrating the independent artist. With your host, Dave Hondell.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Stage Door Show tonight. This is Dave Hondell. Very excited tonight. We have a great actress on the show. You'll see Sam as McKenna on the popular CBS series Blue Bloods. She's also starring in the new romantic comedy entitled Townhouse Confidential. It was showing this past week at the Angelica Theater in New York City, and then it can be seen everywhere streaming starting January 31st. So welcome to the show, Sam Simone.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. I know that we've had a couple people from your current movie on the show. We had Jonas on and we had Lee on. So we got to talk a lot about your movie, which is great. It looks like a fun movie to be in. But one of the first things I want to ask you, starring in this movie in a rom-com, but it's not your typical rom-com. So kind of explain a little bit about the movie and what people can expect, because it's, like I said, it's not your typical rom-com.
Absolutely. Yeah. I would say it is very much a love letter to New York City in the sense that it takes place in the West Village at historical locations like Magnolia Bakery, John's Pizza, Joe's Coffee. You see so many amazing locations throughout this film. But it's a little, I'd say it's closer to like a parody on the Pride and Prejudice Jane Austen story, where you see these like heightened performances and large characters going through issues that may not be so big in the real world, right? But for these characters, they are life and death. So that's where the comedy comes from. And Liz gets into some trouble because, she has the hots for bad boy Tommy Leroy, even though she should be with George Barrow, but she goes in between the two. Who she ends up with, you'll have to watch the movie to find out. So
for sure. Well, in Patrick Perez Vidari, did the directing on this. We've had him on the show as well, and talk about working for for a director like Patrick, where sometimes it gives you a little leeway, I guess, to kind of maybe improvise or maybe give your character maybe something out of your own mind, as and following the script, obviously. But talk about that a little bit, working for Patrick.
Absolutely. So Patrick and I had a unique relationship because we're both Columbia University alum. So we kind of had a shared language, like right from the start. Right. So when he was like, I see this almost as like theater on camera, where it's a little bit bigger. You can play to the back row, even though the camera's 5 feet in front of you. Right. And to have that freedom as a theater artist going into the TV and film medium of like constantly being told like, oh, it's a little too big, it's a little too much. Patrick was like, no, bigger, more, keep it coming, keep it coming.
Yeah.
He was always down if we were like, hey, I think this line would sound better if I said it like this. And he'd be like, oh my God, yes. There's a scene with Joe D'Onofrio and I where there's, he makes a little bit of a flirtatious pass at Liz, and I shut it down by saying like, my oven is closed because she's a baker. And like, we tried a couple of different variations on that. And it was just the most fun because it was like, as an actor, how often do you get to improvise, and how often do you get to like have your voice heard? And Pat is really amazing at saying like, here's the script, here's the character, here's the world. Now let's play.
Right, exactly.
So much
that's
fun.
One of the things I was going to ask you as an actor is because a lot of times when you work for so many different directors, I mean, you've done a lot of TV, you've done a lot of, stage work where a lot of times the director kind of leaves when the show starts, and then you're on your own at that point, but you still have to follow the script. So I guess when you work for so many different people in different mediums, how do you kind of adjust for that? Because, TV, film, and stage are all different. So how do you adjust as an artist?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think for me, it's just learning each person's language and jumping right into what they're looking for. My goal as an artist is always to follow the script and to make sure that the story that I'm telling is the story that what the audience is gravitating towards. I always want to play characters that people can be like, I've been through that, or I've met that person. I know what she's going through. And working in all of these different mediums, you have to just be able to take what is given to you, add it to your tool belt, and just say, okay, I know how to handle this. I know how to do this while keeping the integrity to the words and what the writer wants as well. Not losing sight of your artistry and their artistry, but also keeping the director's vision in mind. Theater, I find, is the hardest in that way because the director, like you said, does walk away sometimes. And you're like, okay, but now I want to try this thing. And it's like, but you can't because you're locked in.
Yeah.
You can still have fun and explore, but how do you do that within the confines of, continuity, even in the TV and film world of you need to be able to match those takes.
Yeah.
So for me, it's just using the different tools I have in my tool belt to be like, okay, I hear what you're saying and here's how I'm going to play.
Yeah, exactly. And then, getting into a little bit deeper, diving into that, the audition process, before you even get the role, I know you're sometimes in front of casting directors and you're not always in front of the director. Sometimes you are, but not always. So, that process, when you get like some sides, and you read the sides and you try to get into that character, because I know now there's a lot of self-tape stuff still going on, but when you're in front, even when you're in front of somebody, do you look at that and say, how far can I go or how far should I push the envelope? Because, you want to push the envelope enough to make yourself, I guess, stand out, but from somebody else. But at what point do you kind of have to put on the brakes? I mean, how do you navigate that?
Yeah, I think in today's world where things are very much self-tape and Zoom callbacks or auditions and things, and actors have been put in this bubble of making their own choices. And then when a director or casting person is like, here's an adjustment, being able to take that adjustment, first of all, is like, oh, wow, feedback, right? Because for the past 2 years, we've been throwing things out into the void and hearing sometimes absolutely nothing.
Yeah, right.
So that's been a real struggle. But I think in the room, my favorite experience with that was when I was auditioning for Blue Bloods. I was actually the reader for that episode. And they invited me to audition afterwards, and I made some choices out in the lobby and then came in and my mind spaced. So I did what I could. And then they threw 5 or 6 different directions at me because the character could go in very different ways at that time.
Yeah.
And for me, it was like, okay, I'm going to do my best to fit into this world, especially knowing for McKenna, it was a co-star. So how do I fit that world and not detract from the story, not steal focus from these main folks, but add a little bit of lightness or add a little bit of comedic relief or add the detail that you need. So it was just exploring all of those different things. And I'm usually pretty good at picking up in the room of like, okay, I went too far, or no, not far enough. I can push further. But on Zoom, it's like, I don't know if I'm even reaching far enough because like the computer feels like another layer in between you and that other person.
You almost have too many options or too many, redos or retakes. And sometimes it can be too much where you kind of overthink it and it almost sounds forced. Is that fair?
Absolutely. I've had to limit myself to doing, even with the self-tape, I'm like, okay, I'm going to do 4 takes because you don't get much more than that in the room itself in the old days. And then when you're on set, you don't really get more than 2-3 takes. So I do 3 takes and then I do an F for fun take and just try something different. But it's so easy to get in your head of like, what are they thinking? What do they want? How do I do that? And without having that face-to-face interaction anymore, we're left to our own devices, and that can be dangerous for some people.
Yeah, for sure. I guess just kind of a fun question here, as far as auditions go, everybody that's in the industry has had kind of a crazy audition story, and many of them probably, but what's your craziest audition story that you can share with us?
Yeah, this is pre-pandemic. So I auditioned for a horror short film audition. I think it was at the Producers Club. It was like a weird location to audition for a film.
Yeah.
The director was 45 minutes late, which was no fun. So I was patient and whatever. And then he shows up with this like metal cage, goes into the room, says nothing, calls me in. And I hear this like noise coming from this metal cage. And I was like, okay, I have no idea what's going on. So like, we're just gonna, okay, we'll do the best we can here.
Go with it.
I do the scene. And he's like, so a couple things have changed. Tells me pretty much nothing I saw it was on Backstage. Nothing I saw on the Backstage post was still true. The character had changed, the situation had changed, everything had changed. So he's like, so I'm going to show you something. And it was this cage. He lifts the door up and there are these disgusting looking rats.
Like
and
live
he's like,
ones?
live rats. And he was like, so these are your co-stars and we're filming in rural Pennsylvania next week. Like, what are your thoughts?
Wow.
And I immediately went, oh my God, I totally forgot I have.
I gotta wash my hair that week. Yeah.
Any excuse I could. I was like, I'm so busy. Actually, I can't. And I called my mother and was like, I'm lucky I survived.
Oh my God. That's one of the best ones I've heard yet. Awesome.
It was so weird.
Well, when do you think we're going to get back from the self-tape back to in front of people? I mean, because right now nobody's wearing masks out there hardly. And I mean, it's just weird to see still self-tapes going on. So when do you think we're going to get in front of actual casting directors?
I really hope it's soon. I think logistically, it's probably not going to be for a little while still, just because of, I mean, I get it as a casting person. If you don't own the space that you are asking actors to come to, why spend the money? Like when you can do things faster and quicker using self-tape, you can see more people that way.
True. Yeah.
But from our end, we're missing the human connection. And that's what actors want to do. We want to connect. And, I just think back to my like Blue Bloods experience where I was in the room the whole time. And that was so magical. And because they fed off my energy and I fed off theirs, it was like, we speak the same language. And now actors aren't getting to know casting. Casting isn't getting to know us other than our slate, which correct. Yeah. Do they watch? I don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
So I hope soon, but
well, the other thing I want to go back to the theater a little bit here because, I've always been involved with the theater with my kids and growing up through regional theater and everything like that. But, I always wondered, when an actor, because I never acted, I was always behind the camera. But on stage, I've always been fascinated by this when an actor goes on stage, like let's say on Broadway or off Broadway, and you have 1,000 people out there, and you do this show 8 days or 8 shows a week, matinee, sometimes 2, whatever shows a day, and it becomes muscle memory, when you go out there and do your role. But I suppose at the expense, hopefully not, but at the expense of somebody paying these $200 or $300 tickets, and you want to make sure that you're always, performing to that person who've never seen this show before, and they're excited. It was a night out for them, and they went to dinner, and now they're going to go to the show. But as an actor that does it so many times, how do you stay up for every performance like that to make sure that one person who bought that ticket, who's never seen it, has the same experience as somebody who's seen it 20 times?
That's an awesome question. I think for me, it's coming to the theater, and I learned this in high school. I did like a performing arts program as well as going to regular high school.
Sure.
And my director would always say, when you come to the door, you check everything that you're bringing with you for that day at the door, and it'll be waiting for you when you get back. Because I feel like a lot of the times when performances alter, it's because an actor is dealing with something from their day, or they're worried about something the next day. Those worries are going to be there when you leave the theater, as well as when you came in. So I have a bit of a ritual of like just getting myself back into the space. And then even though it is, by muscle in terms of your blocking and being in the right places and things like that, when you're working with other actors, everything is new every night. And the beauty of live theater is things do go wrong, and like being able to have that improvisational skill to pivot. If you're so in your head and so by rote, you're going to miss those opportunities. Right. Or if someone misses a line, how do you save it if you're like, oh, well, my next line is this and I've checked out? So really listening. On days where I feel off, I turn my listening on to a different level, and then I can respond more naturally to my fellow co-stars.
And then also when you're on stage, when let's say somebody's phone goes off in the audience, or somebody says something, or they're crinkling their candy bar, wrapper, you have to hear that on stage, correct? I mean,
oh yeah.
I mean, so how do you stay in character when that there's some annoying person that's in row 3 that you just want to stop and say, stop it? So how do you go through that? I mean, do you ever lose your thought process?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think the only time I didn't was when I was in a show in my undergrad. And we were allowed to kind of play with the audience at the top.
Oh,
So
okay.
when people were on their phones or things like that, I would just go sit next to that person in the house and be like, hey, what's
Until they
up?
stopped.
Yeah,
Until
until
they
they
did it.
stopped. Because, I have to remind myself that not all theater goers are theater people, and they
Yeah.
don't understand the etiquette of
Correct.
being in the theater and knowing that, like, yes,
Right.
your cell phone dinging is really going to distract me.
Yeah.
So what I do is I take a breath and I get right back into the story. It's distracting for like a hot second, and then not letting it derail anything, because the second you lose focus from what's going on stage, you're feeding into that person's energy. And that's what they want, right? They want you to be like, ah.
Yeah. Some, I suppose that's the heckler of the theater world, right?
Exactly.
Somebody annoying you. The other thing is you teach young kids on camera work, when you're not working yourself. So what do you teach?
Yeah, I teach. So I work for MN Acting Studio at the moment. I kind of coordinate a lot of the educational boundaries in terms of like what we're working on within that semester. But I work with kids ages 10 through 17, as well as prepping for college.
Yeah.
I teach on-camera skills for the most part, from auditioning all the way through the final callback. To being on set. And then for college prep, it's breaking down the monologues and in-person callbacks, because fortunately for them, they are in person.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, it's a lot of fun. I love it.
I was going to say, I just yesterday interviewed Ava Johnson, who's the young Tina Turner on the Broadway tour. And this kid sat in front of this microphone, and I couldn't believe the professionalism she showed during that interview. And she was 9 years old.
I know.
And I'm thinking, the people you work with, the kids, I mean, is that something you teach them, not only to be in front of the camera, but how to treat people off camera as well, and how to treat their career, and how to act in front of an interviewer?
Absolutely. For me, it's always meeting the child where they're at first and foremost.
Yeah.
I don't want to ever make kids feel uncomfortable or like this career is scary or hard. It is scary and it is hard, but they're young, and as soon as you lose that joy and you want it too badly, that's when you lose the fun.
Yeah.
But the professionalism, a lot of these kids are coming from parents who are not in the arts, at least to my experience. A lot of their parents are business professionals or do other things, and they need a positive role model who is poised and articulative and, is able to be that person for these kids, to say, like, yes, you need to treat yourself like an adult in those moments, because it is your career. Right. Yes, your parents have to answer your emails until you're 18, but it is your career, and you are steering this ship just as much as they are. So being grounded and just listening to these people and being kind, that was something I was always told, even on like Blue Bloods. One of my PAs was like, how I know you're new at this? Because you always say thank you. And I was like, I hope I say thank you even when I am the series regular.
It shouldn't be a new thing.
It shouldn't be a new person thing. Exactly. So I always say that with my students, of like, be that person who says thank you. Yeah. Be that person who says I appreciate you, or thank you for doing that for me. So
I mean, a lot of times, the receptionist could be the casting director someday, and people don't realize that, and I learned that years ago when my daughter was getting headshots by this guy, and this guy's been in the business for years. He did headshots for a lot of different, actors and actresses and so forth. And the one thing he always told everybody, like the young kids that came in, treat my receptionist the same way you would treat me or a casting director or whomever, because you never know who that person's going to be down the road. And it's a small world, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And they'll remember that.
Yeah, for sure. And, I guess, what's your biggest piece of advice? You've been in the business for a while, and you've done a lot of, great things, and you're successful. The biggest piece of advice that they would take away for, a career like in the business.
So my grandfather was a professional musician, and this piece of advice comes from him. He passed away a few years ago, but before he died, I asked him how he was so successful, because he He was kind of like me. Like, he taught, he performed, he did it all, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So I was like, Grandpa, how did you do it? And he was like, I trusted that I had this much talent, and I never took myself too seriously. I took the work seriously, but I never took myself too seriously. So that's always kind of my mantra and my motto. And that's what I pass on to my kids, of like, take the work seriously, do your homework, learn your lines, be prepared, be ready to go. But don't take yourself too seriously. Go into that room confident and fun. Because as soon as you go in, like, oh God, am I talented enough? Am I going to get this part? Your worries have already beat you. And you are not going to get that part because you're so worried about everything else. The second you let that go and say, I'm talented, I deserve to be here, I am enough, I am talented enough, and I trust this process, I'm going to have fun. That's when we get to see you as the artist in the role, or you as the artist, just how you're going to be on set. Because a lot of it is just, do I want to hang out with you for 8 hours?
or longer, yeah.
Yeah. So it's taking the work seriously, but not taking yourself too seriously, and just trusting the process.
That's great advice. What drives you, Sam?
Oh, I am a very a highly motivated and highly ambitious person. I've always been. But I think for me, it also comes back to my grandfather, with him being so, in my eyes, he had it all. He had a wife and 2 children, and he ran this successful business. He was a teacher. He played the piano and sang absolutely beautifully. And when I was little, I started with music and was like, this is not my thing. And the first time I performed, I was like, oh my God, this is it. Like, I love this. The way Grandpa loved playing music. And for me, it's always just wanting to do the work and tell the stories and touch people, whether that's, they leave the theater being like, wow, I hated that, but I have so many questions, and sparking a conversation and sparking a dialogue, or I loved that and that was amazing, but it made me think of X, Y, and Z. As long as you get people talking and people connecting, you did your job. And I love that aspect of it. The just person to person, actor to audience, no matter what medium you're in, the conversation and the dialogue that it sparks.
Yeah, that's well said. And Sam, have you ever had one of those moments, either in the front of the camera or on stage, that was like a spiritual moment, like, you'll never forget, like that one moment that when it's all said and done, you're going to look back and say, wow, that was a really cool moment?
Yes, I've had 2. I had one on stage. I was performing in my college thesis production of The Seagull. And I was playing Nina. Andre Serban was directing. It was just like, oh God, it was amazing. But Andre altered the last scene a little bit and had me say a bit of a mantra to the entire class. And it was like, I am enough. I will keep going. I will not give up.
Right.
And to this day, anytime I feel a little down, or maybe I didn't book that job that I really, really wanted, or, whatever the case may be, I remind myself of that performance and that, like, Nina kept going.
Yeah.
And I played, like, we were cast for a reason. And it's like, I can keep going. I can push through. And the other moment was actually during Townhouse Confidential.
Oh, wow.
We were doing I'm not going to spoil anything, but there's a wedding scene. And the vows were written like the morning before. So we were like, they were fresh in our brains.
Yeah.
The day had just been going, not wrong, so to speak, but like we blew out a generator. It was really hot. Like nothing. Yeah. We had like 2 takes to maybe get each angle by the time we ended up getting everything up and running.
Yeah.
And I don't know what it was, but just being in a church and looking at another human being and saying vows was just a really surreal moment for me. And like, I just dropped right into what that is for this character.
So it made that scene even more real.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was just such a fun experience to be like, wow, I'm really, really present right now in what's going on.
Well, that's so cool. That's a great story. Both of them. Before we go, I'm going to ask this question. what do you want your legacy to be at the end of your career? What do you want people to look back on as they think of Sam Simone?
Yeah. I like to think of myself as equal parts actor and teacher coach. I really pride myself in the fact that my students trust me and come to me with any and all auditions that they have. So I would like to be remembered for not only being a fantastic performer, but also supporting my students through anything that they have coming their way. I would love to be like, my dream show would be to be like a new girl kind of thing, or A Good Place, a series regular on a show like that.
Yeah.
That speaks to what people are going through in that moment, in that time, makes people laugh, because how often in today's society do we get to just laugh?
Yeah.
We don't. That's why like Townhouse is such a great moment in time, because it's we know we're
release. Yeah.
It's such a release. We're so bogged down by such negativity that like having that release is really great. Telling truthful stories, and then being that supportive person for all of the students that I have now and my future students.
Well, Sam, before we go, I also want to let everybody know how they can find you on social media. So let everybody know how they can look you up and follow you.
Absolutely. So I'm old. I only have Facebook, Instagram, and a website, because homegirl does not TikTok. I'm too old. I turned 30 in 2 weeks.
I don't even go onto my TikTok hardly.
So I'm on Facebook at Sam Simone. My Instagram is Sammy Sims 21. Like, think I'm a DJ. It's like that kind of vibe.
Awesome.
And then my website is SamanthaNicoleSimone.com.
All right. Well, there you have it. Sam Simone and Townhouse Confidential comes out streaming on the 31st of this month, January. If you're listening to it past that, well, guess what? It's already out there. So,
Valentine's Day, tune in.
There you go. Exactly. Well, Sam, I can't thank you enough for being on the show. It's been a real pleasure to talk to you. And, the trailer is amazing, and I'll be seeing the movie, of course. Can't wait to see that. But, the best of luck to you on everything that you do. And congrats on all your success.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.